Keanu Reeves, one of the most recognized and beloved faces in Hollywood, had seen the world through the lens of fame for decades. Yet, on this particular day, as he stared at his reflection in the mirror, something had shifted within him. The life of a movie star, the flashing cameras, and the endless praise were no longer enough to satisfy his curiosity. He was haunted by a question: what would happen if I stepped outside the bubble and lived like one of the forgotten? With that thought, Keanu made a decision that would change everything. He would go undercover, disguised as a homeless man, and see the world from a perspective most people never truly understood. But he wasn't just doing this for a fleeting experience, he wanted to learn something deeper about humanity. He wanted to understand what life was really like for the people who lived on the fringes of society, invisible and unheard. It wasn't an easy choice. Keanu had spent years building his career, his reputation, and his image, but this mission required him to strip it all away. He took a deep breath as he pulled on a worn-out hoodie, smudged dirt on his face, and let the disguise settle in. The celebrity, gone. The actor, gone. All that remained was a man who was about to disappear into the streets. Los Angeles had always been a city of extremes. Glitzy movie premieres, luxury cars, and high-end restaurants on one side, the dark alleys and homeless encampments on the other. Keanu had seen the divide before, but now he was about to experience it firsthand. The city that had given him everything, was also the city that had forgotten so many others. As he stepped outside into the harsh midday sun, he felt the weight of his decision. He looked at the people passing by, going about their busy lives, oblivious to the struggles of those living just a few steps away. He wondered how long it would take before anyone even noticed him, or worse, if anyone would notice him at all. Keanu's pulse quickened as he made his way down the street. The clack of his shoes on the pavement, the noise of the traffic, and the distant chatter of pedestrians felt oddly distant. He blended into the crowd, too well. He was invisible. Is this what it feels like to be nobody? Keanu wondered, his mind racing. He made his way to a nearby park bench, where other homeless individuals sat or lay, trying to escape the unrelenting sun. He felt a strange mix of discomfort and determination, knowing that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than himself. The hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort, it was the emotional weight. The fear of being judged, dismissed, or worse, ignored. Keanu sat down on the bench, trying to keep his head down, not drawing attention. He watched as people walked by without even a second glance, their eyes glued to their phones or lost in their own worlds. He saw a few people toss spare change into the hats of others. But no one seemed to notice him. Not even the person who walked right past him, brushing his shoulder. Invisible. He clenched his jaw, holding back the anger bubbling inside. He had seen this before in films, of course. The lonely character, ignored by society, looking for a way out. But now he was the one living it. This was his reality, his test. How long will this last, he wondered, taking a deep breath and glancing around the park. Every face he saw, every passing moment felt like it was slipping further into a world he didn't belong to. He pulled out a small notepad from his pocket and began to write, trying to process his thoughts. His pen scratched across the paper as he documented what he was seeing: people avoiding eye contact, hurried steps, brief glances of sympathy that quickly turned away. It was a cruel reminder of how quickly people could turn a blind eye to the ones who needed help the most. Keanu closed his notebook and tucked it back into his jacket. The heat was becoming unbearable, and his stomach growled loudly, a stark reminder that he hadn't eaten anything in hours. He stood up, deciding to walk toward a nearby corner store, hoping to buy something cheap to eat. But as he approached the store, he was met with something unexpected. A young woman, no older than 25, was standing on the corner, holding a sign that read, "Anything helps." She was clearly struggling, the same way he was, but there was something different about her. Her eyes weren't empty, they were full of life, full of desperation, but also hope. She saw him, and she didn't look away. "Hey," she called out to him as he approached, "you need something? I can spare a few bucks if you're hungry." Keanu blinked, momentarily thrown off guard. It wasn't often that anyone ever spoke to him, at least not like this. And yet, here she was, offering kindness to a complete stranger. "Thanks," Keanu muttered, unsure of what to say, but grateful nonetheless. "Don't worry about it," the woman smiled, handing him a dollar bill. "Just remember that there are still people out here who care, okay?" Keanu nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. It was a small act, but to him, it felt monumental. He had been on the streets for only a few hours, and yet this was the first time someone had genuinely acknowledged his presence. As he walked away, a thought lingered in his mind: this wasn't just about the mission anymore. This was about the people. The ones who don't get the luxury of being invisible. The ones who are fighting every day just to survive. What had he been missing all along? Before he could finish that thought, he heard a voice calling out from behind him, a voice he would soon come to remember. "Hey, wait!" He turned around, unsure of what to expect next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Keanu walked through the bustling streets of Los Angeles, his every step filled with unease. The city that had always been his playground, his stage, now felt like a foreign land. The sun hung heavy in the sky, its rays reflecting off the glass buildings, casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalks where people walked by, heads down, eyes fixed ahead, seemingly impervious to the world around them. It wasn't long before the weight of his decision hit him harder than he had anticipated. His stomach growled again, but this time it wasn't the hunger he was concerned about. It was the sinking feeling in his chest. What had he gotten himself into? The streets were an unforgiving place. The hum of the city drowned out any possibility of finding solace. People zipped by in a rush, wrapped in their own busy worlds, while Keanu, disguised in his worn clothes, felt invisible, ignored. It wasn't just the physical discomfort that was getting to him, it was the emotional sting of being discarded, a ghost in plain sight. As he walked down the sidewalk, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a store window. For a moment, he barely recognized himself. Gone was the actor, the public figure that everyone adored. In his place was a man who was nothing more than another nameless figure, struggling to find his place in a world that didn't care. His clothes, torn and stained, hung loosely on his frame, his face covered in dirt. He looked nothing like the man who had graced the big screen for years. Keanu's eyes fell to his hands. His once perfectly manicured fingers now looked raw, cracked from the rough texture of the concrete. It was a harsh reminder of how far he had fallen into this new world, this forgotten world. He turned a corner and stumbled upon a park, a small oasis in the middle of the urban jungle. The grass was dry, and the benches were empty, save for a few people who appeared to be in the same position he was, lost, disconnected from the world. One man, sitting on a bench not far from him, caught his attention. He was older, with a long beard and graying hair, his clothes ragged but carefully arranged. The man stared ahead, his eyes vacant, but there was something in his demeanor that spoke volumes, a silent acceptance of his circumstances, a man who had long ago surrendered to the reality of life on the streets. Keanu hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach him. But curiosity won out. He slowly walked over and sat down on the bench beside him. "Hey," Keanu said, his voice low, trying to sound like just another person trying to get by. The man didn't look at him at first. Instead, he continued to gaze at the horizon, as if contemplating something far beyond the city's hustle. After a moment, he spoke, his voice rough but calm. "Not many people talk to me," the man said without turning his head. "Most just keep walking. Guess it's easier to pretend we don't exist." Keanu felt a pang in his chest. He had thought the same thing just moments ago. Yeah, seems like people don't even notice. The man finally turned his gaze to Keanu, his eyes sharp despite the weariness that seemed to have settled in his bones. People don't want to see what they can't fix. Makes it easier to ignore. Keanu nodded, his thoughts racing. He had heard stories like this before, stories of people falling through the cracks of society, people who were overlooked, forgotten. But this wasn't just another story. This was real. This was happening right in front of him. So, what's your story? Keanu asked, trying to keep the conversation going. He wasn't sure why he felt compelled to talk. Maybe it was the man's quiet wisdom, or maybe it was the fact that, for once, someone was willing to talk to him like a human being. The man let out a long sigh, his fingers absently tugging at the strings of his worn jacket. Life was different once. Had a job, had a home. Hell, I even had a family. Then one day, things just fell apart. Lost my job, lost my wife, lost everything. And here I am. Keanu listened intently, his heart heavy with empathy. He had known the man's type, people who had once had it all, only to watch it slip through their fingers. But he'd never truly understood the depth of that kind of loss. Until now. It's hard to come back from that, the man continued, his voice growing softer. People treat you like you're invisible. Like you don't matter. But the truth is, everyone has a breaking point. And once you hit it, the world just forgets about you. Keanu swallowed hard, the words echoing in his mind. The world forgets about you. He sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the man's words settling in his chest. He had known about homelessness, of course. He'd seen the statistics, heard the stories. But there was something about sitting here, next to a person who had lived it, that was more real than any documentary or news segment could ever be. The man stood up abruptly, brushing off his pants. It's not all bad, though, he added with a small, crooked smile. We find ways to survive. We help each other out. Sometimes, that's all you can do. Keanu watched as the man wandered off, blending into the crowd once again, disappearing into the sea of faces that didn't care. And for the first time since he'd stepped into this world, Keanu didn't feel so alone. The man's words stuck with him, we help each other out. As Keanu sat back against the bench, watching the people around him, a new understanding began to form. This wasn't just about survival. It was about connection. About finding light in the darkest places, even when the world refused to see you. It wasn't long before another person approached him, a young woman carrying a small backpack. She was in her 20s, with short, dark hair and an air of determination. She didn't seem to fit the stereotype of someone living on the streets, but her presence was unmistakable. Hey, she said, her eyes scanning Keanu for a moment. You okay? Need anything? Keanu hesitated. There was something about her demeanor, her quiet strength, that made him want to trust her. Yeah, I'm all right. Just thinking. She nodded, offering him a faint smile. I get that. A lot of us do. But sometimes, thinking isn't enough. Sometimes you have to act. Keanu looked at her, surprised by her words. Act? She shrugged. Sometimes, we don't get to wait around for a handout. We have to fight for what we need. It's the only way to survive out here. As she turned to leave, Keanu couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. Fight for what we need. It was a mentality that he had never truly understood until now. He watched her walk away, the shadows of the city growing longer in the fading light. He thought about the man, about the woman. He thought about the people who lived in the margins, and how they fought each day just to keep going. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was a lesson. A lesson in survival, resilience, and the human spirit. Keanu took a deep breath and stood up, ready to face whatever came next. It was time to see how far this journey would take him. Keanu's feet ached from walking, his body exhausted from the relentless sun and the weight of his new reality. The excitement of the first few hours had worn off, replaced by a constant, gnawing sense of discomfort. He hadn't anticipated just how grueling life on the streets could be, even for someone who had lived a life of luxury. He had imagined that he could survive this experiment with ease, but he was starting to understand the complexities, the hidden struggles of living without a roof over your head. After parting ways with the young woman, Keanu found himself wandering the streets once more, aimlessly following the crowds of people who appeared so different from him. He was still trying to grasp the full scope of the experience, the alienation, the constant search for food, the ever-present worry about safety. But even more unsettling was the realization that no matter where he went, he still felt invisible. The world wasn't just ignoring him, it was actively shutting him out. Around late afternoon, after scrounging together a few coins from some sympathetic people, Keanu found himself sitting on the edge of a park near a small food stand. The smell of hot dogs and pretzels wafted through the air, teasing his empty stomach, but the price was well beyond his reach. The thought of it almost made him laugh, he, Keanu Reeves, reduced to begging for scraps. He sat back, arms folded, and watched the world go by. People bustled along the sidewalks, not sparing a single glance his way. Some tossed glances at the homeless in the park, but none stopped. They passed by with such urgency, so focused on their own lives that they seemed to forget the human beings in front of them. Just as he was about to lose himself in thought, a familiar voice called out to him. "Hey, you!" Keanu turned, expecting another passerby with a quick glance or a dismissed question. But this time, the voice was different, more direct. More insistent. And, to his surprise, it came from the very woman he had spoken to earlier, the one with the backpack. She was standing a few feet away, a strange look on her face, determined but uncertain, like she was trying to decide something. When she saw him look in her direction, she walked over without hesitation. "You need a place to crash for the night?" she asked, eyeing him with a mix of skepticism and kindness. Keanu blinked, unsure of what to say. He hadn't expected her to approach again, much less offer help. I'm fine," he replied, though the truth was far from that. He hadn't exactly found the comfort or safety he was looking for. "Thanks, though." The woman didn't seem convinced. "Listen," she said, "it's dangerous to be out here alone at night. I've been on these streets a while, and I know how things can go. You don't want to end up in the wrong place, trust me." Keanu hesitated. Part of him wanted to turn her away, to refuse the offer. After all, he was Keanu Reeves, he shouldn't need help. But another part of him, a more vulnerable part that he hadn't been willing to acknowledge, realized she was right. There was something about her, the quiet confidence she exuded, that made him believe her. She knew the streets in a way he didn't. And maybe that was something worth trusting. "Okay," he finally said, standing up and brushing off the dirt from his pants. "I'll take you up on that." She led him through the park and down a narrow alleyway that Keanu would have never dared to walk through on his own. The walls were covered with graffiti, and the air had a strange, metallic smell. But she moved with purpose, as though this was a path she had walked many times before. They arrived at a small, hidden courtyard between two buildings. It was tucked away from the main roads, and there were no signs of the busy world just a few streets away. The space was cluttered with tents and blankets, a small group of people gathered around a fire in the center. It was a makeshift community, one that had formed in the margins of the city, where the homeless found shelter and, in some cases, a sense of belonging. "Here we are," the woman said, stopping just before entering the circle. "It's not much, but it's safer than being out on the streets." Keanu looked around, taking in the sight of the community. There were a few older individuals, some younger, and a couple of children playing by the fire. It was a strange mix of faces, each with a story written in their eyes, though many kept their heads down, avoiding direct eye contact. The woman turned to him and gave a small, wry smile. "By the way, I'm Emily." "Keanu," he replied, offering a slight grin. "I know it's a little crazy, but I didn't expect anyone to actually offer help." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, that's because most people assume that if you're out here, you've already given up. They don't get that we all have our reasons for being here. Some people fell on hard times, others are just trying to survive. Do you mind me asking what brought you here?" Keanu asked cautiously, genuinely curious. He had spent so much time looking at the world through his own lens, the lens of fame and fortune, that he hadn't ever truly thought about the lives of people who ended up on the streets. Emily paused for a moment, her eyes flicking to the fire as she seemed to weigh whether to answer. Finally, she spoke. "Some of us end up here because we don't have anywhere else to go. Maybe we've been kicked out, or we lost our jobs, or maybe we made some mistakes along the way. It's not easy to get out of it once you're stuck here. No one gives you a second chance unless you can find it yourself." Keanu nodded, a wave of understanding washing over him. This wasn't just a matter of survival. It was a matter of resilience, of finding a way to keep going, even when the world around you had given up. He could feel a shift inside himself, a change he hadn't expected. As they sat by the fire, the sounds of the street fading into the background, Keanu realized that this was the first time he had truly connected with someone in this world. Not as a famous actor, not as a celebrity, but as a person, sitting in the same space, struggling with the same realities. For the first time since he had donned his disguise, Keanu felt like he belonged. The warmth of the fire surrounded Keanu as he sat there with Emily, watching the flames dance and flicker in the cool evening air. The city buzzed beyond the courtyard, its noise muffled by the walls that separated this hidden world from the streets. For a brief moment, Keanu felt like he had stumbled into an alternate reality, a place where survival didn't depend on fame or fortune, but on the basic need for connection, shelter, and food. Around the fire, the others had started to settle in. An older man with graying hair and a weathered face, sitting on the far side of the circle, gave Keanu a small nod of acknowledgement. Emily, who had introduced him to this place, turned her attention to the fire, her expression thoughtful. "So," Emily said, breaking the silence. "You're probably wondering why we all stay here instead of trying to get back on our feet." Keanu glanced over at her, sensing an underlying question in her tone. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it. I mean, it seems like a small community. Like you're all trying to make the best of it." Emily hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully before speaking. "It's not that simple. We're not trying to make the best of it, Keanu. We're surviving. That's all we can do. But not everyone out here wants to stay like this forever. The truth is, getting out of this, it's like climbing a mountain. Every step feels like a struggle, and sometimes, the world keeps knocking you back down." Keanu absorbed her words, his mind racing. He had always thought of survival as something to be conquered, something to fight against. But now, sitting with Emily, hearing the quiet yet determined voices around the fire, he was beginning to understand that survival wasn't just about making it through. It was about resilience. It was about holding on to hope, no matter how small that hope might seem. "You ever think about leaving?" Keanu asked carefully. "Trying to find a job or something? Get back to a normal life?" Emily's laugh was low and bitter. "You think it's that easy? The system doesn't let people like us back in. People here have records, or they've been out of the workforce for too long. You can't just walk into a job interview and say, 'Hey, I've been living on the streets for the last year, but I'm totally qualified.' It doesn't work that way." Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He had never truly understood the barriers people faced, especially those who were living on the streets. The idea of being trapped in a cycle, constantly battling not just survival but the system itself, was something he had never experienced in his privileged life. "So, what happens?" Keanu asked. "You just stay here?" Emily looked at him, her gaze intense. "Yeah, sometimes. We keep fighting in whatever way we can. Some of us get by doing odd jobs or helping others out. But most of the time, we're just trying to stay alive. That's the price of survival, constant struggle, constant uncertainty. And you never know when it'll all come crashing down." The reality of her words hit him harder than he expected. Keanu had always assumed that survival meant fighting off danger, overcoming obstacles, winning against all odds. But in this world, survival was about more than just winning. It was about enduring. Enduring the pain, the rejection, and the loneliness that came with living in the margins. And that was something he couldn't truly grasp until now. As the night wore on, the group around the fire grew quieter. The sound of distant traffic and the occasional siren cut through the otherwise still night, but here in the courtyard, the noise felt like a distant memory. The others slowly settled into their makeshift beds, and Keanu found himself wrapped in a thin, worn blanket, the warmth from the fire now fading into the cold air of the night. He lay there, staring up at the sky, the stars obscured by the haze of city lights. Thoughts swirled in his mind. For the first time, he realized how fragile everything in his life had been: his fame, his wealth, his sense of control. All of it could be taken away in an instant. But for these people, this was their reality. They had been dealt a hand they couldn't fold, and they had to play it every single day. Keanu thought back to the man in the park, the one who had shared his story of loss and survival. He thought about the woman, Emily, and the others who had welcomed him into their community. They were all part of something bigger than the sum of their struggles, something that transcended survival. They had found a way to live, even if they didn't have everything they needed. What was the difference between them and him? Keanu wondered. Sure, he had the money, the fame, the opportunities, but they had something more fundamental: a connection to each other. A bond forged in hardship, but unbreakable because it was real. And in that moment, lying under the cold night sky, Keanu made a decision. He wouldn't just observe anymore. He would find a way to help. Not as a celebrity, not as someone who could just throw money at a problem and walk away. But as someone who understood, even if just a little, what it felt like to be ignored, forgotten. Tomorrow, he would do something different. Something that mattered. The first light of dawn broke through the cracks between the buildings, casting a faint glow on the makeshift homes in the courtyard. Keanu blinked, the cold still clinging to his bones despite the warmth of the fire from the previous night. He lay there, his eyes open but not quite ready to leave the sanctuary of his blanket. The reality of the streets was still fresh in his mind, a constant reminder that life was fragile and fleeting. As he shifted, trying to ease the soreness in his body, Keanu heard Emily stirring nearby. She was already up, her movements quick and purposeful. He watched as she tied her worn shoes and slipped on a jacket before standing up, her eyes scanning the courtyard. "Morning," she said quietly, noticing him awake. "Morning," Keanu replied, still feeling the weight of everything she had shared with him. He sat up, rubbing his eyes as he tried to shake off the remnants of sleep. Emily motioned toward the group that was beginning to stir around the fire. "We're going to head out soon," she said. "Some of us try to get a little work or help around the city. Others just hang out for a while and see what happens." Keanu nodded, taking in the people who were now slowly waking up. Some of them were older, with faces etched by time and hardship, while others were younger, perhaps lost or searching for something that made sense. It was clear that each person had a story, one that had led them to this point, and perhaps one that could lead them out of it. "Do you need any help with anything?" Keanu asked, standing up and stretching his aching body. He wasn't sure what exactly he could offer, but he knew he had to do something. The helplessness he had felt when he first arrived was still there, but now it was accompanied by a desire to make a difference. Not just for himself, but for the people around him. Emily gave him a small, grateful smile. "If you want to help, there's a soup kitchen a few blocks away. Some of the folks in the group go there to serve food. You can come with me, but don't expect it to be glamorous. It's hard work, and a lot of people don't appreciate what we do." Keanu hesitated for a moment. He had spent the majority of his life in a world that praised the glamour of charity work, the kind of work that felt good for the soul but often lacked the grit of real, everyday struggles. This was different. This was about being in the trenches, working alongside those who had nothing but the clothes on their backs. But that was exactly why he had come here, to understand. "I'm in," Keanu said, his voice steady. "Let's go." Emily led him through the winding streets, past rows of abandoned buildings, through alleys where the smell of decay hung in the air. Keanu followed silently, taking in everything. The city was full of stories, stories of people who had fallen through the cracks, whose struggles were invisible to the world. The people here didn't just face hunger or cold. They faced something deeper, a constant, gnawing sense of invisibility. As they walked, Emily turned to him. "You know, a lot of people think that helping the homeless is just about giving them food or clothes. But it's not. It's about making them feel seen. About showing them that they matter." Keanu felt the weight of her words. He had never really thought about it like that. He had always assumed charity was about giving money, food, supplies. But the people here didn't need things. They needed dignity. They needed to know that they were not forgotten. When they arrived at the soup kitchen, Keanu was surprised by how much activity there was. A line of people had already formed outside, waiting for their turn to be served. Inside, the atmosphere was bustling, filled with the sounds of clattering pots and the hum of conversation. Volunteers, mostly local residents, worked tirelessly to prepare meals, while others served food to the line of people that stretched across the room. Emily immediately went to work, helping to organize the flow of people and distribute the meals. Keanu stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, but Emily waved him over. "Grab a ladle and start serving. Just ask people if they want soup, and don't make a big deal about it. Just treat them like anyone else." Keanu did as instructed, standing by one of the counters and offering soup to those in line. At first, he was awkward, unsure of the best way to interact with the people coming through. Some of them barely looked up, too focused on their meal to acknowledge him. Others gave him a nod of thanks, while a few lingered to chat. Keanu found himself in conversations he never expected, listening to stories of loss, of hardships, of moments that had led people to the brink. One man, in his mid-40s, looked up at Keanu with tired eyes. "You don't look like you're from around here," the man said, his voice gruff. Keanu chuckled. "You could say that." The man eyed him carefully. "You sure you're not lost? A guy like you doesn't usually end up in places like this." Keanu's smile faded slightly. "I'm just here to help," he said simply. "Is there anything you need?" The man studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "A lot of people come through here. Some of them are just passing through, looking for a meal. But a few of us, we're stuck here. No way out. You ever wonder if you'll ever get out of this?" Keanu swallowed hard, the weight of the question pressing down on him. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately." The man gave a small, knowing smile before taking his soup and moving on. Keanu stood there for a moment, reflecting on the conversation. The question had been simple, but it hit him in a way he hadn't expected. Will you ever get out of this? It wasn't just about the streets. It was about life itself. Could people ever truly escape the cycles that held them back, the struggles that seemed so impossible to overcome? Keanu wasn't sure of the answer, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to stop trying. The days blurred together as Keanu continued to spend time with Emily and the others, working at the soup kitchen, talking to people on the streets, and learning more about the lives of those who had lost everything. He began to understand the complexity of their situations, the fear, the shame, the hopelessness that gnawed at them constantly. Each person had their own story, a story of dreams once big and bright, now dimmed by the weight of life's misfortunes. Keanu listened to them with a new perspective. These weren't just nameless faces in a crowd, they were people who had experienced the pain of the world's indifference, who had fought battles most couldn't even imagine. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at their resilience. Yet, for all the stories, there was one thing that stuck with him the most: the lack of hope. The feeling that no matter how hard they tried, it would never be enough. For some, it seemed like the cycle of poverty and homelessness was an unbreakable chain, too strong to escape from. But Keanu wasn't one to give up. Not when there was a possibility, however small, of changing someone's life for the better. One afternoon, as he walked with Emily through the city after another long day at the kitchen, he found himself lost in thought. Emily, sensing his quiet contemplation, stopped in her tracks. "You're thinking too much," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Keanu gave a small smile, rubbing his temples. "I can't help it. There's so much to take in. The whole system, it feels broken. So many people out there just need a chance. They need someone to see them. To believe in them." Emily's expression softened, her eyes reflecting a depth of understanding. "Yeah. But it's hard. People get caught up in their own lives. They don't see the people who are struggling. They don't see the faces behind the numbers." Keanu nodded. "But we can. We can make them see. We can give them that chance." Emily looked at him skeptically. "You really think that's possible? People like us don't get second chances. No matter how hard we try, we'll always be seen as the homeless." She shook her head, almost as if she was talking to herself. "It's like we're invisible." Keanu stopped walking, his gaze locked on hers. "Maybe it starts with making people see. Maybe it starts with us believing we're not invisible, even when the world tells us we are." There was a long pause. Then Emily sighed, a quiet sound of resignation. "It's not that simple, Keanu. You can't just wish away the pain, or the years of being forgotten. People need real help. They need jobs, housing, education, things that give them the dignity they deserve." "I know," Keanu said softly. "But I can't help but think that if we don't start somewhere, if we don't create some kind of change, it'll never happen. I've seen the spark in people here. I've seen it in you, too. There's hope, Emily. It's just buried deep down, but it's there." Emily looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "You're an idealist. But I guess that's what people like you do, right?" Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small notebook. "I've been thinking," he said, flipping through the pages until he found what he was looking for. "What if we could find a way to help people get back on their feet? Not just by giving them food, but by giving them skills, training, maybe? Or even something simple, like teaching them how to write a resume or get a job interview. It's not the big fix, but it's a start." Emily raised an eyebrow, taking in his words. "You're serious, huh?" "I am," Keanu said, his voice firm. "I've been thinking about a plan. Maybe we can start small, build a program for the people in this community. Teach them what they need to know to get back out there and change their lives." Emily stared at him, processing what he had just said. Then, slowly, she gave a half-smile. "You really think you can change the world like that?" Keanu shrugged. "I don't know if I can change the world. But I can try. And maybe, just maybe, I can help a few people along the way." There was a quiet pause between them before Emily nodded. Alright. Let's do it. Let's see if we can build something. We'll need the right people, though. The ones who've got the skills, the knowledge to help others. And we'll need support, resources, maybe even some funding. Keanu's eyes lit up. We can get that. I know people. People who owe me favors, people who care about this kind of thing. I'll make some calls. They stood there in the street, the noise of the city buzzing around them, but for the first time in a long while, Keanu felt a sense of direction. This wasn't just about helping one person or one group, it was about creating a ripple effect that could reach farther than he had ever imagined. In that moment, he realized something he hadn't fully understood before: true change wasn't about money or fame. It wasn't even about power or influence. True change came from believing in people. It came from offering them a chance when no one else would. And that's exactly what he was going to do. The following days were a whirlwind. Keanu wasted no time putting his idea into motion. With the determination of a man on a mission, he set out to gather the necessary resources. He spent his mornings on the streets, talking to people, asking for their input on what would help them the most. And in the afternoons, he made phone calls, reaching out to old contacts, colleagues from past projects, and even a few charity organizations he had worked with in the past. Emily, though initially skeptical, started to come around. She joined him in his effort, using her connections within the community to rally others to the cause. Together, they began to lay the foundation for their program, one that would teach practical skills, offer workshops, and provide the homeless with tools to help them get back on their feet. Keanu didn't know exactly how this was going to work, but he was determined to try. He knew there would be challenges, hurdles to overcome, and perhaps even moments where they would feel like giving up. But he also knew that if they didn't take the first step, nothing would change. Late one afternoon, as Keanu was wrapping up a meeting with a local employment agency that agreed to partner with their program, Emily approached him with a concerned expression on her face. "Keanu," she said, her voice low. "I talked to a few of the people here. And, not everyone is on board with the idea." Keanu raised an eyebrow, the frown on his face deepening. "What do you mean?" "Well," Emily hesitated. "Some people feel like it's too much of a risk. They've been let down by promises before, you know? They've heard it all: we're going to fix everything, we're going to help you. But it never happens. They're afraid this is just another one of those things." Keanu sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. It made sense. For many of the people in this community, the idea of trust was a fragile thing. They'd been promised help too many times, only to watch those promises fall apart. "I get it," Keanu said quietly. "I do. But we have to show them that this time it's different. We can't give up just because a few people are skeptical." Emily nodded slowly. "I agree. But you know it's going to take time. Building trust isn't something that happens overnight." "I know," Keanu said with a thoughtful expression. "But that's the point, isn't it? It's not about making grand promises. It's about showing up, day after day, and doing what we said we would do. That's how we earn their trust." Emily smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "You're right. We'll start small. We'll keep our promises, no matter how long it takes. One person at a time." And so, they did. Over the next few weeks, Keanu and Emily continued their work. They held workshops on basic job skills, things like resume writing, interview preparation, and even setting up a LinkedIn profile. They partnered with local businesses who were willing to offer temporary work to help the homeless get a foot in the door. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Some people dropped out of the program, discouraged by the difficulty of the work or by the fear of failure. But there were also small victories. One by one, people began to take the first steps toward rebuilding their lives. And with each success, the program gained momentum. More people joined, more businesses got involved, and slowly but surely, Keanu began to see the seeds of change taking root. One afternoon, a week after they had started, Keanu was at the soup kitchen when he saw a familiar face walking toward him. It was Tom, the older man who had been skeptical when Keanu first arrived. Tom had always been quiet, reserved, and somewhat distant from the others, but today, he was different. He had a small, hopeful smile on his face as he approached. "Keanu," Tom said, his voice gruff but warm. I just wanted to say thanks." Keanu blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For sticking around," Tom said, his voice cracking slightly. "I've seen a lot of people come and go. But you're still here. And I can see you're trying to do something real. That means something." Keanu's heart swelled, and he smiled. "Thanks, Tom. That means a lot to me. But honestly, it's not just me. It's everyone here. We're all in this together." Tom nodded, his expression softening. I know. I've been thinking a lot about this whole thing. And I think you might be onto something." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Tom looked around the room, where people were eating, laughing, and talking, something that had been rare in the past. "I see the way things are changing. People are starting to believe. You know, it's not just about the food. It's about the fact that you're treating us like we matter. You're giving us a chance." Keanu felt a lump in his throat. "That's all I wanted. For people to feel like they have a chance." Tom smiled. "Well, you've got one more believer now. I'm in. I want to help. Whatever I can do." Keanu's heart raced. This was it. This was the turning point. One person, one believer at a time. And with Tom's support, they could do even more. "I'm glad to hear that, Tom," Keanu said with a grin. "We could really use your help." The rest of the afternoon was spent in a whirlwind of activity. Tom began talking to others, spreading the word, and before long, more people were coming forward to offer their help. It was a snowball effect, one small act of faith leading to another, and soon, Keanu saw his vision starting to come to life in a way he never thought possible. As the sun began to set, Keanu stood outside the soup kitchen, watching as the streets began to come alive with the hustle of the evening. It had been a long day, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a genuine sense of hope. The work wasn't over. There was still much to be done. But now, he knew that they were on the right path. And in that moment, he realized something important. The journey wasn't just about helping others find their way. It was about finding his own path, too. Keanu's heart had never felt lighter, but the road ahead wasn't without its bumps. Just as the program started to gain traction, trouble began to stir in unexpected places. It began with a phone call late one night. Keanu was sitting at his kitchen table, going over some paperwork when his phone rang. It was from one of his old contacts at the employment agency, someone who had been crucial to getting businesses involved in their project. His name was Rick, and his voice sounded tense on the other end. "Keanu, we've got a problem," Rick said, his tone heavy. Keanu immediately sat up straighter, sensing the urgency. "What's going on?" "Some of the businesses you've partnered with, well, they've started to back out. They're saying that they don't want to be associated with a program for the homeless. They're afraid it will hurt their image." Keanu's stomach sank. "What do you mean?" "We've been getting people jobs, Rick. They've been making a difference. Why would they back out now?" Rick sighed, and Keanu could hear him shuffling papers in the background. "Look, it's not personal, but there's a lot of pressure. Some of the companies feel like the negative publicity could cost them in the long run. It's complicated." Keanu's grip tightened on the phone. "We've been doing everything by the book. Everything's above board. This isn't just about charity, we're giving these people a real shot. I know that, Rick replied. But businesses are worried about their image. They don't want to be seen as enabling the homeless. They want to distance themselves from any association with the program. It's a PR issue. Keanu sat there in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what Rick had said. It felt like the rug had been pulled out from under him. The program was just starting to show real results, and now, it was at risk of crumbling because of an issue beyond their control. Are you telling me that everything we've worked for could just fall apart because of this? Keanu's voice was sharp, frustration building. We're talking about people's lives here. Real lives. I know, man, Rick's voice softened. I wish I could do more. But right now, it's out of my hands. The pressure's too much. You're going to have to find another way to keep it going. Keanu didn't respond right away. The weight of it all settled on him like a heavy cloud. He had spent so much time focusing on helping others that he hadn't expected something like this to happen. The road ahead felt uncertain again. His mind raced, but one thing was clear, he couldn't give up. Not now, not when they were so close. He took a deep breath and finally spoke. Thanks for letting me know, Rick. I'll figure something out. After hanging up, Keanu sat back in his chair, staring out the window at the city lights. The weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders. He couldn't let all their work go to waste. But how could he continue without the businesses that had initially supported the program? The next morning, Keanu met with Emily at the soup kitchen. She could tell something was off the moment she saw his face. What happened? She asked quietly, pulling up a chair beside him. They're pulling out, Keanu said, his voice low with frustration. The businesses, some of them, anyway. They're worried about their reputation. They don't want to be linked to a homeless program anymore. Emily's face hardened. That's bullshit. People are making real progress here. They're working, they're learning, this is a chance they've never had before. I know, Keanu said, rubbing his forehead. But I don't know how to keep this going without that support. It's not like we can just run it on our own forever. Emily paused, her expression thoughtful. Then, slowly, she leaned forward. What if we didn't need them? What if we could find a way to do this on our own? Keanu blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? Emily shrugged, her eyes sparkling with determination. We've got the people. We've got the heart. Why do we need businesses or big organizations to make this work? What if we started our own fundraising? We could go directly to the community. People who really care. People who want to help. Keanu's mind raced, considering the idea. He hadn't thought about going outside the traditional channels for support. But maybe that was the key. If they didn't rely on businesses, they could create their own system, one built entirely on community support and grassroots efforts. You're right, he said slowly, a sense of hope rising in his chest. We could crowdsource the funding. People want to be part of something meaningful. We could host events, run donation drives, partner with local organizations and individuals. It's worth a shot. Over the next few weeks, Keanu and Emily worked tirelessly to pivot the program. They reached out to local activists, community leaders, and anyone who would listen. They held fundraising events, both big and small, and used social media to get the word out. They tapped into the power of the community, people who were passionate about making a change, no matter how big or small. And something unexpected happened, it worked. Donations began to pour in, small at first, but steady. Local businesses who had initially backed out began to rejoin, seeing the momentum their community was building. Keanu and Emily were able to fund their programs through the generosity of the very people they were helping. It was an inspiring turnaround. But it didn't stop there. Keanu realized that while the financial support was important, the true value lay in the relationships they had built. The people they were helping weren't just numbers or clients, they were now a part of a larger movement, a team. And that made all the difference. As Keanu stood before a packed community hall one evening, speaking to a group of supporters, he felt a sense of accomplishment that he hadn't expected. This wasn't just about a program anymore, this was a movement. And they were just getting started. I know we've faced setbacks, Keanu said, his voice strong, but look at what we've built together. This isn't just about giving people jobs or training. This is about giving them dignity. Giving them a chance to take control of their lives. And none of it would have been possible without you, without the people who believed in this cause. We're not done yet. We're just getting started. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time in weeks, Keanu felt the weight lift from his shoulders. There would always be challenges. There would always be setbacks. But as long as they had each other, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The weeks that followed were transformative. What had once been a small, scrappy initiative began to grow into something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Keanu and Emily continued to focus on their core mission, providing real opportunities for those who had been forgotten by society, but now they had the support of the community behind them. Their efforts expanded beyond workshops and job training. With the donations pouring in, they were able to provide housing assistance, transportation, and even access to mental health services. The program wasn't just about getting people back to work, it was about offering the holistic support that many had never received before. But what truly amazed Keanu was the transformation in the people they were helping. Some of them had been on the streets for years, others had fallen into addiction or mental health struggles, and many had simply given up. But with each passing week, the program was making a tangible difference. Take Sarah, for example. She was one of the first to enroll in the job training program. A mother of two, Sarah had been living in a shelter after losing her job and home to a string of bad decisions. But after just a few weeks in the program, she secured a part-time job at a local cafe. She was working hard to build her life back up, and most importantly, she was starting to believe in herself again. Keanu, Sarah said one afternoon, pulling him aside. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Keanu smiled, feeling a surge of pride. You did the hard work, Sarah. You deserve this. I'm just glad I could help you get there. She grinned, her eyes bright. I know. But you know what? It's more than just a job. It's like I'm getting my life back. I feel like I have a future now. That was the moment it hit Keanu just how much this program had changed lives. It wasn't just about giving people a paycheck, it was about restoring their sense of dignity, their belief in their worth. And that, in turn, was what would propel them forward. But as their success grew, so did the challenges. The larger the program became, the more scrutiny it attracted. Some of the same businesses that had initially backed out were now reaching out again, asking how they could get involved. But there was also opposition, voices from those who felt that the money and time being spent on the homeless could be better used elsewhere. There were protests, heated arguments at city council meetings, and media coverage questioning the sustainability of their efforts. One night, as Keanu sat at his desk reviewing some of the latest media articles, Emily walked in, a folder in hand. She looked concerned. We've got a situation. Keanu looked up, setting his pen down. What's going on? Emily handed him a stack of papers. The city council is reviewing a proposal to cut funding for homeless services. They're calling it unsustainable. They want to redirect the resources to other parts of the city. Keanu's jaw clenched. But everything's been going so well. We're making a real difference. Why would they cut funding now? I don't know, Emily said, her voice tight with frustration. But they're talking about reallocating the funds to business development projects. They're saying it's more economically viable. Keanu's mind raced, but his thoughts were clouded with a mixture of anger and disbelief. He couldn't let it happen, not when they were so close to making lasting change. "We can't let this happen," Keanu said, standing up from his desk. "I'm not giving up on these people. They deserve better than to be brushed aside." Emily nodded, her eyes determined. "I agree. But we're going to need to fight for it. And we'll need all the support we can get." The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and outreach efforts. Keanu and Emily mobilized their network, reaching out to their supporters, people who had seen the impact of their program firsthand. They organized rallies, met with city officials, and pushed for public demonstrations of the program's success. "We need to show them what we've accomplished," Keanu said during one of their strategy meetings. "We need to remind them that these are real people, real stories. We've changed lives. And that's worth fighting for." And they did. Over the following weeks, the pressure mounted as more and more people spoke out in favor of continuing the program. Videos and testimonials flooded social media. Former participants shared their success stories, detailing how the program had given them not just a second chance, but a whole new life. Keanu stood alongside Emily at a large rally outside City Hall, surrounded by supporters, volunteers, and program participants, all chanting for change. The energy in the air was electric. People who had once been overlooked and ignored were now standing up for what they believed in. When it was Keanu's turn to speak, he stepped up to the microphone, his heart racing. "We are not just talking about numbers. We're talking about human beings. People who have been given a chance when no one else would. We've seen what happens when we give people the resources they need, not charity, but real opportunities. And we are not going to stop now. We will fight for these people. We will fight for their future." The crowd erupted into applause, and Keanu could feel the weight of their collective hope. It was the moment they had all been working for, the tipping point. A few weeks later, they got the news they had been waiting for: the proposal to cut funding was rejected. The city council voted to continue supporting the program, citing the overwhelming public support and the proven success of their efforts. Keanu let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned to Emily, who was grinning from ear to ear. "We did it," she said, her voice full of triumph. Keanu smiled back, feeling the same rush of relief. "We did. But it's just the beginning." As the program continued to grow, Keanu knew that there would always be challenges ahead. But he also knew that they had built something that couldn't be undone, not because of the support of businesses or politicians, but because they had earned the trust and belief of the community. They had proven that change was possible, and that together, they could make a real difference. And as Keanu walked through the streets, now filled with people going about their daily lives, people who had been given a second chance, he realized that he had found something more than just a cause. He had found his purpose. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What do you think is the most important step in creating lasting change in a community?